Das Ganze hat so begonnen, ich bin in st. in die Schule gegangen.
It happened in my high school years in 1964 when I was 16 years old. During the week I was in a dormitory in 𝗃𝗶𝗿𝗄 in Lower Austria, 30 miles from my parents' home. One day in school on Thursday, December 3rd, I had a ruptured appendix. But this did not become clear until Monday of the following week in the hospital, because the burning pains that I had shortly before the rupture suddenly disappeared when the rupture happened. Then, as usual, on Friday, I came home to my parents in 𝗁𝗵𝗿𝗄 for the weekend, and on Sunday evening I wanted to go back to the dormitory. But my mother noticed that something was wrong with me, so she called our family doctor. He thought I had the stomach flu, but my mother was not satisfied with that diagnosis, so the doctor had me taken by ambulance to the local hospital in 𝗃𝗵𝗿𝗄𝗃. There, the surgeon in charge, who was also the head doctor, quickly realized that I must have had the rupture on the Thursday before, when my stomach pain suddenly disappeared, and he said I would not survive. However, he liked operating very much and wanted to try an innovative surgical method on me, even if he thought it was too late. But my mother agreed, so I was operated on shortly before midnight. The next day I felt amazingly well, which the doctors could hardly believe. But as time went by, I started to have severe pain again, so I was operated on a second time, but it didn't help. Then, on December 19th, I became physically unconscious for the first time. But in that moment, I had a much clearer awareness than usual. I could sense everything. I saw my relatives around the bed and the priest when he anointed me. After the anointing, my relatives had to leave the hospital because they were dependent on public transportation. They were expecting me to die that night. But when they left, I could still sense them, especially their sadness. For me, after all, the situation was beautiful and sacred, so I wished that the others would rejoice with me or feel assurance for me. That would have been easier for me, but their grief weighed on me. They obviously didn't have that sense for the beauty and love on the other side that I had, although we were all Catholic. Even during all the days in the hospital, before I passed out physically, this situation was beautiful and holy for me, because I was not afraid of death at all and I was awaiting my passage into eternity. Eventually, my sickbed with my body lying in it was moved to a laundry room and I was declared dead at about 8 p.m. At some point, I was suddenly in a darkness, reliving my life from birth to this point like a movie. I saw myself as the main actor with many other events, but I was surprised to see it in black and white rather than in color. The first important scene I re-experienced was when I was 4 years old and teasing my little sister, who was 2 at the time, as she lay in her crib. I re-experienced the feeling of having fun teasing her when suddenly I heard a voice telling me this teasing was not okay at that time. However, I didn't want to acknowledge that at first. I also looked for excuses to justify this teasing. On the other hand, I thought if it was wrong, I would have to pay for it. So I was also condemning myself, meaning a very stressful struggle between good and evil was going on at this point, which felt like an eternity to me. In such situations, I think there is a danger of condemning yourself for your own sins and thus going to what we call hell. Therefore, I believe that it is not God who condemns us, but, if anything, we condemn ourselves. I saw only negative events in this movie, and I expected more transgressions, I remembered, but some did not appear. Later, I realized that these transgressions did not appear because I had already acknowledged and repented of them before. Sometimes during this life movie, I was also surprised because I realized lapses that I had not previously been aware of at all. During this life movie, you become absolutely clear about what is right and wrong. You know it exactly. It becomes problematic when you do not take responsibility for your own misconduct, or when you acknowledge the misconduct but condemn yourself for it. This life movie was very intense and felt like it lasted for a month. The mental pain I experienced from reliving my transgressions was much more intense than the physical pain I had ever before. Physically, however, the whole thing lasted only 8 hours, because at 8 p.m. I was declared dead, and at 4 a.m. my body was discovered to be alive again. After the life review, first the darkness came again. And then I experienced this indescribable light, so incredible it is ridiculous to call it light, because it is much more than just a visual light. It radiated enormous security, warmth and beauty. I was completely fascinated by it and irresistibly attracted to it. I had an indescribable longing to enter into this light. I noticed that other souls were also moving towards this light, and I could perceive transparently and telepathically exactly what these other souls were thinking and feeling. The closer I came to the light, the more I had a share in the entire knowledge of the universe, of which, however, I could not take the largest part with me. On the one hand, this light was absolutely irresistible, but there was also a slight fear that I might disappear in this light and cease to exist. In the same moment, I was being shown that this fear was unjustified and that I will remain an individual with freedom of choice. This made me realize that I am completely independent of time and space and that I can move to any place at any point in time. Thus, I first fulfilled my childhood wish to visit Japan. So I visited Japan in 1348 and experienced a terrible battle there. I wanted to help the victims there, but it was not possible. Then in my thoughts I asked how this battle turned out, and already I experienced the result in addition to the battle. In this state, on the other side, you can perceive events simultaneously in a way that you cannot in physical consciousness, and you get the answer to your questions at the same moment you ask. I also visited a city in Australia and was in a situation where a scientist presented an innovation, but it was not implemented because there was an unrecognized error. However, I was aware of this flaw and wanted to explain it to this scientist. It seems to be that absolute knowledge prevails in this other world, and we here in the earthly world are blocked from it, which also has to do with the fact that we humans are often so much focused on our earthly things that we separate thereby ourselves from the constantly existing spiritual world. Also, I saw a future situation where a whole family was killed in a car accident not far from my hometown in Lower Austria. I wanted to prevent this accident and tried in this instant to grab the driver's steering wheel, but I couldn't intervene. While moving towards the light, it suddenly came like a command from the light itself that I must return to my body. I didn't want to go back at all, but I had to. Then I saw my body in the hospital from above. After that, I dove into the body, and that was terrible. It was very painful mentally and physically. At first I couldn't move my body, but then I felt my right toe. There was a tag hanging on the toe with my name and time of death. At some point an employee came in and I moved that toe to make myself noticeable. This person got very scared, screamed and ran out. Then other staff came in immediately, and they didn't care about me at first as much as they cared about finding the death certificate, because they wanted to prevent it from getting outside the hospital. That was a bit disappointing to me. After this experience, some emotional suffering began. It was not because of my sick body, because it quickly recovered, but mainly because I was back in this body and earthly life. I could hardly come to terms with it, because this state was like a prison compared to the freedom and glory I experienced on the other side. There was also the problem that I couldn't talk to anyone about this experience. I was not understood by others, even though my environment was Catholic. I also made the mistake of telling my mother that I would have so gladly stayed over there, that I would have renounced this life on earth if I could have decided for myself. I did not realize that my mother could not understand this and that she was very offended by it. Then over time she became more and more desperate and finally committed suicide. I then suppressed this experience for a long time, wanting to draw a line and even leave the church, because I could not talk about it with anyone. But I secretly knew all the time that it was not a dream. 9 months later, I read in a newspaper about this accident the family that I saw during the near-death experience had. This happened near where I lived, and I knew immediately that it was this accident. Someone also confirmed details about this family to me that I already knew and were not in the newspaper, especially what this family was wearing, the mother's jewelry and the girl's doll. From this, I had clear confirmation in my mind that this was a real preview of the future at that time. I did not like this confirmation at all, because I wanted to forget the whole thing. It was not until many years later that I consciously reflected on this experience again and was able to integrate it properly into my life. Today I see it as a wonderful gift, and I don't want others to mourn me when I die, but I want them to have a party and be happy for me.
Wenn ich sterbe, dann sollen sie ein Fest feiern, ein Freudenfest. Sie freuen darüber, dass der Herr mich aufnimmt, dass ich heimgehen durfte.